Hello and welcome to this video lesson. This is on critical reasoning. I've got quite a few requests to take a session on critical reasoning, especially for the XAT. So in this particular video lesson, I'm going to start with basics of critical reasoning and take some examples from the XAT to help you understand how to crack questions on critical reasoning. So let's start with understanding what is critical reasoning. Critical reasoning essentially tests your ability to analyze logical arguments, right? As simple as that. So now the question is, what is a logical argument? Now, before I get to logical arguments, there is a few things that I think you must understand. One is, you do not need to know formal logic. Now there is formal logic, you can learn it by the way, but you don't need to know formal logic. However, I believe that a few basic things would help you answer these questions better. So what we'll do now is try and understand a few basic things which will really help us answer these questions better. Okay. So what is a logical argument? An argument is a series of statements used to present reasons for accepting a conclusion. Okay, let me help you understand that in English. Let's say that I say God exists and you say God does not exist. Is that an argument? A lot of people feel that is an argument. I'm saying God exists and you say God does not exist. There is a different point of view. Well, is that an argument? Actually, no. It is not an argument. All that has happened is me making a claim that God exists and you making a counterclaim that God does not exist. But these are not arguments. What is required in an argument is essentially that we need to present reasons. That's the most crucial thing. The necessary thing for something to become an argument is that we have to provide reasons to justify the claim that you're making. Let's take an example to understand this better. This is a comment made by Chetan Bhagat, where he says, demonetization is a good move. Given the extent of black money in the country and the tiny taxpayer base, something had to be done. What he said, there are these two sentences. One, which is demonetization is a good move, is a claim that he's making, and not only that, he's also giving a reason as to why he's making that particular claim, which is this part. So let's not look at whether this is a good argument or bad argument, but let's understand this is an argument where there's a conclusion is based on a certain reason. Let's take another example. MBA degree will help you get an insight into the tricks and acumen necessary for competent handling of business and segments constituting it. You should go for an MBA. Now, here this person is giving a conclusion, making a claim that you should go for an MBA degree, and that he is backing that by a certain reason, which is given in blue. So this is a logical argument. An argument has a conclusion that is supported by premises. Premises are essentially reasons that are given to justify the conclusion that is being made. So that is a word that is used in formal logic. So that's a reason in an argument is called a premise. Let's just take a quick example. You should marry Radha because she has the same temper as you. Now, you should marry Radha is a conclusion, and the premise given is that she has the same temper as you. So you can look at this in argument and say the premise is that Radha has the same temper as you, which is the reason that is given to justify the conclusion that you should marry Radha. Now that is a logical argument, ladies and gentlemen. An argument requires a set of statements where a conclusion is drawn from a set of premise. Now let's take a look at this argument that all men are mortal. Aman is a man, Aman is mortal. Now these two are the premise to the argument, and this is a conclusion that is drawn from those set of premise. Now what you see is, if these two are true, if these are true, now you will see that this conclusion is guaranteed. It cannot possibly go wrong. If all men are mortal, Aman is a man, then Aman has to be mortal. Now let's look at another argument. It says most men are right-handed, Aman is a man, probably Aman is right-handed. Here the difference is, all that I know is most men are right-handed and that Aman is a man. The conclusion that Aman is right-handed is a conclusion that is not guaranteed. this conclusion is not guaranteed. However, I can say this is more likely to be true than since most of the men are right-handed. So you see these two different types of argument. This type of argument is essentially known as deductive arguments, and this type of argument is essentially known as inductive arguments. Okay, we'll not get deep into these two different type of argument. What we need to understand is here we are checking whether or not the argument is valid, and here we are checking whether or not the argument is strong. Inductive argument check the strength of an argument, and deductive argument check the validity of an argument. A valid argument is an argument where the conclusion is 100% true if the premises are true. So strong arguments, an argument is the conclusion is more likely to be true than false. That kind of argument is an inductive argument. The reason why I pointed these two out is simply because of this. These kind of argument, evaluating that kind of argument is pretty easy. I think you would have done in syllogisms. This is actually an example of a syllogism where you're checking the validity of a conclusion. So what you do in syllogism is by drawing Venn diagrams. You can say, okay, if that's a set of men, and if I take this particular claim that all men are mortal, so we can think of a set of mortal which is bigger than the set of men, and then you can push the second premise in, Aman is a man, then this is guaranteed that Aman is a mortal. Evaluating whether or not something is valid is a little easier. However, when it comes to evaluating these kind of arguments which are inductive, and that's a different story altogether. Please understand, almost all critical reasoning question, the argument would be mostly inductive. In fact, every argument would be inductive, and the evaluating those kind of argument is slightly trickier and different than evaluating the first type of argument, which is the deductive arguments. So let's go ahead and understand how to evaluate argument. The step number one to evaluate arguments is to convert an argument into its standard form. Now when I say convert an argument to standard form, what I'm essentially asking you to do is to identify the premise and the conclusion in a given argument. Can I identify the conclusion and the reasons given to justify that particular conclusion? Remember, premises are reasons justifying a particular conclusion. Let's take, for example, a simple statement, or so someone is making this statement that everyone is allowed to go out. Why can't I? Can I convert this or understand this as a logical argument? So you would probably see the argument would be something like this. Here it says the premise one is all persons are allowed to go out. I am a person, therefore I should be allowed to go out. Now any argument can be converted into the standard form. When I'm saying convert in the standard form, it's not so important to write this down in the standard form. Well, what is important is, can I identify the conclusion being presented and the premises given in the particular argument, right? So let's take example of this. This is from gpkafunda.com. It's a blog written by your favorite teacher GP, and in that there is an article on cracking XAT. I think this was written by Siddharth, and there this advice was given: go with the mindset of attempting RCs. If you're not attempting RCs, you will not score high in this section. Now what is a claim being made and what is the reason behind making that claim? And when you start looking at like that, you will understand that this would be the argument being made presented there. The premise is, if you do not attempt RCs, you will not score high. From there, the conclusion being drawn is, therefore go with the mindset of attempting RCs. Let's take one question from XAT 2010. In this case, can you identify what is the conclusion being made and what are the set of premises in this particular argument? Here it says, the increase in the number of reality shows on television channels bolsters the contention that channel owners are more interested in supporting their revenues by pandering to voyeuristic tendencies of viewers. Now hidden in this is an argument, and the best thing to do to identify argument is to first identify the claim or the conclusion. Normally in every argument, the person makes one claim or one conclusion and justifies that with a lot of other things. There is a main conclusion that is being made. So let's read this again to identify the conclusion. It says the increase in the number of reality shows in the channel bolsters. Bolsters essentially means strengthens the contention. So what is the contention? The contention is the channel owners are more interested in boosting their revenues, and therefore that is a claim being made, or that is a conclusion being made. The rest of them are essentially, once you identify the conclusion, you can understand the rest of them are essentially reasons given to justify that particular conclusion. Now you can convert this and write this in this particular fashion. Premise 1 is there is an increase in reality shows on television channels. Premise 2, channel owners pander to the voyeuristic tendencies of viewers. Conclusion, therefore channel owners are more interested in boosting revenues. And this, ladies and gentlemen, would be the argument. This is from one paragraph of reading comprehension in XAT 2016. Let's have a look at this. It says each piece or part of the whole of nature is always merely an approximation to the complete truth, or the complete truth so far as we know it. In fact, everything we know is only some kind of approximation, because we know that we do not know all laws as yet. Therefore, things must be learned only to be unlearned again, or more likely to be corrected. This would be the typical challenge that you'll face in XAT. Sometimes things just bounces and you may have to do amount of rereading. And to the first thing in these kind of thing is to understand a structure. So let's start figuring out where is a conclusion and what is the main conclusion is trying to make. Now here there's a word therefore, so that this would be the main conclusion is trying to make, and there are these reasons that is given to arrive at that particular conclusion. Now let's read the conclusion. Things must be learned only to be unlearned again, or more likely to be corrected. So we have basically the conclusion being made is we have to keep on learning things and unlearning it, and we have to continuously correct our learning. That's what he's saying. Why? Because he says we do not know all the laws as yet. Okay, and because of that particular reason, what happens? All the truth that we know is simply an approximation to the complete truth. So now when I deconstruct this, you can see this particular argument. It says premise is we are aware that we do not know all the laws yet. So we do not know all the laws yet. So that is something that we are aware. And because of that, whatever we know is only some kind of approximation. So whatever we know is only some kind of approximation. Because of these two things, he has arrived at the conclusion saying that therefore we need to constantly correct our learning. So that's the whole argument. So we are aware that we do not know all the laws, because of which everything we know is only some kind of approximation. Therefore, we need to constantly correct our learning. Now, in this case, the structure of this particular argument is slightly different. There is an interim conclusion being made, and from there a main conclusion is being made. You don't have to worry too much about these things so long as you understand what is the main conclusion the author is trying to draw. So we have understood what is an argument. An argument is a series of statements where premises are used to justify the conclusion being made. And the second thing that we understood is to how to identify the premise and conclusion in a particular argument. The next most important step is to understand assumptions. Evaluating inductive arguments, the key would be to identify assumptions. Let's understand what are assumptions, and this would be absolutely crucial. So let's take an argument. Killing innocent person is wrong. That's a premise. The conclusion is therefore abortion is wrong. Now look at the argument again. Killing innocent person is wrong. Therefore abortion is wrong. Don't you see a jump? So there is mentioned killing innocent person and jump to abortion, and that's kind of not strange. It's like the author missed something. The person who's making the argument missed something. And to make this argument valid, let's just correct him and tell him that you missed this particular premise. Killing an innocent person is wrong. Abortion involves killing of an innocent person. Therefore, abortion is wrong. When you now look at this argument looks pretty strong and valid. Right? So this hidden premise, ladies and gentlemen, is what is assumptions. When people make an argument, when people create an argument, in normal life or day-to-day life, we see that we assume a lot of things. We take a lot of things for granted, right? Like in this particular case, all that is mentioned was killing innocent person is wrong, therefore abortion is wrong. And in his mind, he would have thought that abortion involves the killing of innocent person. He would have taken that to be true. Otherwise, this argument will not make any sense. So, simple definition. It's not a definition of assumption. Let's just understand assumption like this. Assumption is something that is necessary for the argument to be valid. Assumption is something that is necessary for the argument. Otherwise, the argument won't make any sense. Let's quickly understand what is necessary. For instance, let's take a square. There are a lot of necessary conditions for something to be a square. That it has 4 sides, and each side is straight. It's a closed figure. It has equal length, and the interior angle is 90 degrees. All these are necessary for a square. So please understand, this is necessary for it to become a square. It is not sufficient. By that mean, just because something has 4 sides does not mean it's a square. But for something to be square, it is necessary that it must have 4 sides. Assumption is something that is necessary for something to make sense. Which means, since assumption is something that is necessary for the conclusion, assumption is something that is necessary. If assumption is negated, then the conclusion drawn will not make any sense. For example, let's say that x does not have 4 sides. If that is true, then it can never be a square. So one way of identifying assumption is to negate the given assumption and see what happens with the conclusion. If the conclusion gets destroyed, then you know that that was a valid assumption. For example, if I take this particular argument and let's do a denial test or a negation test. Let me just call it a negation test to identify assumption. The negation test is abortion. Take the particular given assumption, for example in this particular case, and negate the particular assumption. Abortion involves the killing of an innocent person. So you just negate and see. Abortion does not involve the killing of innocent person, and check if this is true, that abortion does not involve the killing of innocent person. What will happen to the original argument? Killing of innocent person is wrong, therefore abortion is wrong. The moment if this is true, that abortion does not involve the killing of an innocent person, the original argument completely gets destroyed, which is why we can say that this therefore is a valid assumption. So you must, this is a tool that helps you. So I'm just going to call it a negation test, or you can even call it a denial test, which means if you negate the assumption, the conclusion must be destroyed, not weakened, must be destroyed. There is nothing wrong in carrying my mobile phone to a classroom. Other students do it all the time. So the question is, what is assumption? Step number 1 is convert this into a standard form. So the standard form of this argument is this. The premise given is other students carry mobile phones to the classroom all the time. Therefore, there is nothing wrong in me carrying my mobile phone to the classroom. So what is connecting these two things? If something is done by other student, then there is nothing wrong with it. And that is something that the person would have assumed to be true for the argument to make any sense. Assumption in this case, or the hidden premise, is if an action is done by other students all the time, then there is nothing wrong with it. So that with assumption. Assumption is like a gap between your premise and your conclusion. You're kind of filling the gap to make the whole argument solid. Let's take an example from XAT 2010, and this is a question on assumptions. This question says the premise behind the above argument. So the premise behind the above argument. So premise behind is another way of saying what is being assumed. What I'll ask you to do is to read this question, pause this video, we read this question, answer, and then get back to me and check if you got it right. Yes, go ahead and read. Yes, I'm telling you to read. I'm asking you to read. Yeah, pause it. Right, great. Okay, this is something that we already converted into standard form. Remember, the increase in the number of reality shows on television channel bolsters the contention. What is the contention? That channel owners are more interested in boosting the revenues. How? By pandering to voyeuristic tendencies of the viewers. And then we understood that argument like this. The premise is there is an increase in reality shows on television channels. Channel owners pander to the voyeuristic tendencies of viewers. Therefore, channel owners are more interested in boosting revenues. And now, the first step, ladies and gentlemen, is before you actually look at these options, in your head, try and look at things that connects the premise to the conclusion, right? So I can think of a few things. One is there talks about boosting revenue. That is what he's concluding. Nowhere he is mentioned in revenue. It said that increase in reality show, and then he gone to say that is boosting revenue, which means what is assumed therefore is the fact that reality shows makes a lot of money. That's one assumption. You can also think about this. The whole blame of the increase in reality show is actually put on the channel owners. Therefore, also the author is also assuming, or the person is also assuming, that channel owners are responsible for the shows in a television channel, and that's also an assumption. Here, one of the assumptions that we identified is that reality shows on television would mean increase in revenue, and actually you can find that right in option D, which says reality shows make more money than other types of the program. So answer choice is D. If you got it right, great. If you didn't get it right, let's see, just check why. So if you marked option E, the problem is this. E is saying the channel owners can influence what is watched by the viewers. Please understand, assumptions are things that are necessary for the statement to be true, not sufficient. Things that are necessary for the argument to be true. The channel owners can influence. So the key word here is influence. But if you actually look at the argument, it talks about pandering to voice what is the tendencies of the viewers. All that means if the viewers needs X and the channel owners gives X, so there is no influence, so to say, in that particular case, which is why E is not the right answer choice. C, the issue is basic instincts. Reality shows on television appeal to the basic instincts of the viewers. Is voyeuristic tendencies necessarily basic instinct? I'm again asking this question of necessary things. The reason why I'm asking necessary thing is because assumptions, ladies and gentlemen, is something that is necessary for the argument to make any sense. It's not necessary. Even if it does not appeal to basic instinct, still the argument would be okay. And which is why C is not right. And B talks about educational, not necessary, and A talks about recent phenomena, which is not necessary for the argument. What is necessary is reality show makes money, because the argument relies on it. Reality shows on television channel, it boosts revenue, which means what is necessary for that to happen is the reality shows makes money, right? I hope that makes sense. Let's look at another question. Here is another question from XAT 2010 again, and please pause the video, read this question, and then answer the question. Right. Okay, in this case, it says the question is asking us to figure out what? An assumption that is necessary for the author's argument. So let's read this first. It says, unlike other retail outlets where items are purchased in any number of units the customer wants, in supermarkets, items are grouped in bulk packages. This bulk buying offers savings to the customer. The option to buy at wholesale prices by buying in bulk makes supermarkets a practical choice for budget-conscious consumers. Now let's deconstruct this particular argument, understand what the premise and the conclusion is. This is the conclusion being made in this argument, that supermarkets is better or a practical choice. And why? Because supermarket offers bulk packages which offers savings, and other retail outlets you can purchase items in any number of units. A good way to look at the argument is consider supermarket to be A, other retail outlet to be B, and the quality that supermarket provides is X, and the quality that other retail outlet provides is Y, and finally the argument has taken and said that A is better. So you look at the argument like this: A has quality X, B has quality Y, and people would prefer A over B. So in this case, supermarket has a certain quality, the retail outlet has a certain quality, people would prefer supermarket, at least some kind of people will prefer supermarket over other retail outlets. So what is assumed in this particular case, ladies and gentlemen, would be the people will prefer X over Y. That means in this case, other retail outlets you can purchase any number of units, supermarket there is savings, but for this argument to make sense, what is necessary is the fact that for people, savings is more important than purchasing in any number of units. And that is what is necessary for this particular argument, which is given in option E. The financial savings from purchasing bulk packages may outweigh the inconvenience of being unable to purchase in any number of units that suits the customer's need. Right? So this, once you can deconstruct the argument into a simple format, you'll be able to easily identify the assumption that is mentioned. Otherwise, what is essentially going to happen if you don't deconstruct the argument, what is going to happen is you will get confused with these options. But if you deconstruct the argument, the answer choice will actually speak to you. Let's look at the third question on assumption. This is from XAT 2011. The question says, which is certainly not implied. So key is implied is another word for assumption. Okay, implicit something that is hidden, by the way. Which of the following is not implied? Which of the following is not assumed in this particular argument? So this, let's just read this. It says, perhaps this war will pass like others which divided us, leaving us dead, killing us along with the killers. But the shame of this time puts his burning fingers to our faces. Who will erase the ruthlessness hidden in innocent blood? So once you read this and read these options A, B, C, D, E, and we already understood assumption things that are necessary for this argument, you can straight away see that reunites afterwards in peace. Nothing about peace is actually hinted or mentioned anywhere in this particular passage. So therefore that certainly is not implied. Answer choice had to be B. The rest of the thing is implied. Killers also get killed in the war, killing us along with the killers. So which means what is necessary for that is killers also get implied. This war is especially ruthless. That is also implied. This war is shameful to the entire humanity. That's also implied. Okay. None can obliterate the ruthlessness of this war. Obliterate would mean to wipe out or to erase. So that is also implied in this particular question. So therefore, answer choice had to be B. What we've done so far, we first understood what are arguments, which requires premise leading to conclusion is argument. The second thing is we looked at the standard form, which is our ability to identify the conclusion and the premise. The third thing that we looked at is assumptions. Assumption would mean your premise plus the assumption which is hidden is your conclusion. And we also understood that assumption is something that is necessary for the premise to connect to the conclusion. And now let's look at evaluating arguments. Evaluating arguments would mean that, okay, somebody gave an argument and there are new data or new evidences or new facts that is available. 5 on 5 toppers in XAT are students of ABC Coaching Institute. Therefore, join ABC Coaching Institute for XAT coaching. And I'm sure that as students, you keep hearing various versions of these kind of arguments. Now, before to evaluate this particular argument, let's quickly understand the assumption. Okay, so you have to join ABC coaching. Why? Because there are toppers. So one assumption is that if there are toppers, then it becomes a great coaching. The second assumption is also the fact that there are toppers and you have to join ABC Institute, which also means assumption is ABC is a cause of those students joining this topping the XAT. That makes sense, right? The conclusion is saying you have to join ABC Coaching Institute because there are toppers. Obviously, the argument is assuming that the reason why they became topper is because of the coaching that was provided by ABC. That's actually not explicitly mentioned, but that is an assumption that is necessary for the argument to make any sense. Now, let's understand new evidences or new information. What it can either strengthen the argument, it can weaken the argument, or it is something that is irrelevant to the argument. Let's take, for example, this information. All the 5 toppers have given testimonials that it is because of ABC Institute that they topped the XAT. If this information is true, and that provides strength to the whole argument. Oh fine, this, I'm not saying this will make the argument 100% valid. All that I'm saying, it supports the argument that being made, and it actually supports assumptions and gives weightage to the argument being made. So if all the 5 toppers have given testimonial that is because of ABC Institute that they top the XAT, that means that there is a merit in joining this particular coaching institute. While, let's take for example this data information. All the 5 toppers were test series students of ABC Institute, and 3 of them were classroom students of XYZ Institute. Now that casts certain doubt in the argument being made, because the argument is being made based on you joined ABC coaching because they are topped. So what is assumed in this particular argument is the reason why they topped is because of their ABC coaching. Now this puts some doubt in that they were test series students, and also they were classroom students somewhere else. So this weakens the argument. I'm not saying it destroys the argument. I'm saying that it casts certain doubt in the argument. It weakens the argument. A third is ABC Institute has 5 full-time teachers. Even if that is true, that actually doesn't do anything to this particular argument. Neither support nor weaken the argument. Just a piece of information which I'll say is irrelevant to the argument. Right. Now there are questions in the critical reasoning where additional data is given and you're asked whether it strengthens the argument or it weakens the argument. Let's take a few examples of and see how we can answer these kind of questions. Let's look at this question is from XAT 2012. Please pause the video, solve the question, and then see if you got it right. The question says, which of the following statement, if true, so we have to consider each of the statement to be true, refutes the above argument. Refute essentially is not only actually weaken, actually contradicts the argument being presented. Now we need to understand the argument. The step number 1 would be to identify its standard form. So which means we have to identify what the conclusion and what the premise being made. Step number 2, we have to evaluate what is the assumption in this particular argument. And step number 3 is to now evaluate the options. And you might be feeling that this is a long drawn process. Actually it is not. It has to happen automatically. Your brain has to be trained to identify the conclusion automatically. So while reading you can make sense of the argument. Let's read. The 2001 census showed a sharp fall in the literacy rate compared to 1991. But an increase in the literacy rate by 2006 suggests that between 1991 and 2006 India progressed in terms of literacy rate. So this is between 1991 and 2006 India progress in terms of literacy rate is a conclusion being made, and it is presented by 2 evidences or the premise. What are the premise? There is a sharp fall in literacy rate in 2001 as compared to 1991, but after the sharp fall there has been an increase. So there has been a sharp fall from 1991 to 2001, but after that there has been an increase till 2006, and is making a conclusion that India progressed in terms of literacy rate from 1991 to 2006. So that is an argument. Literacy rate fell from 1991 to 2001. Literacy rate increased from 2001 to 2006, and therefore there is an overall increase. For that to be true, what is that is required? Let's look at this particular case. 1991, 2001, 2006. Let's consider 2 cases: 1991, 2001, 2006. All we know is there has been a decrease. After that, there is an increase. So in this case, okay, there has been an overall increase. But consider this case: there has been a decrease and there is a slight increase. However, from 1991 to 2006, there is a decrease, which means whatever is the rise has to be much higher than the fall that has happened, and that is what is assumed in this particular argument, because he is concluding this particular case that overall there has been an increase. So rate of increase from 2001 to 2006 was higher than the rate of fall. That is what is being assumed in this particular argument. And which of the following refutes it? You can straight away see option number C directly refutes it. If this is true, then the argument would not make any sense. The rate of fall in literacy rate between 1991 to 2001 was more than the rate of rise in literacy rate between 2001 and 2006. This actually will actually refute the whole argument which is given. What it means is the rate of fall in literacy rate was higher. Whatever fall was higher than the raise that happened. Then how can you say from the first point to the last point there's an increase? If this is true, there'll be a literacy rate would have not increase but decrease, refuting the argument being given. And you look at other options, it'll all be irrelevant. One of the causes not discussed in this particular argument, although there was no census, reliability, many of those who are illiterate became literate, so what? How does it refute? The rise in literacy was due to cause is not relevant to this particular argument. So what is absolutely relevant to the argument is option D. Let's look at another question from XAT 2012. So please go ahead and solve this question and see if you get it right. Now this question says, which of the following, if true, most strengthen argument made in the sentence above? So let's first of all deconstruct the particular thing. First is understand the standard form, which means I can understand what is the premise and what is the conclusion. Second is figure out if there are any assumptions that are required. I'll take a guess on it. And third would be to evaluate the options. So let's look at the whole argument. Ethologists, people who study animal behavior, have traditionally divided an organism's actions into two categories: learned behavior based on experience and instinctive behavior based on genotype. Some current scholars reject this distinction, claiming that all behavior is a predictable interaction of experience and genotype. Actually, if you look at this, we can't typically find any conclusion or the author's position in this particular argument. But at least let's take, because you have said this, that some current scholars reject this distinction, let's take that to be true, okay, and evaluate this particular argument. So what is being rejected? So we have ethologists. Ethologists talking about animal behavior, and they have divided into two categories. Learned behavior is one and instinctive behavior is two. So there are two kinds of behavior. That is what ethology says. One is learned behavior and one is instinctive behavior. Current scholars are saying there is no such things. All are predictable. Every behavior is predictable, and is based on experience and genotype. Experience and genotype is what determines the animal behavior. That's what the argument is. So if you are to look at the argument, you can see the premise is traditionally animal behavior is divided into two, learned and instinctive. Premise 2, some current scholars reject that, say all behavior is predictable based on experience and genotype, therefore traditional distinction is wrong. So that is simply the argument. So now if I evaluate all the answer choices A, B, C, D, they look very similar and talks about genotype and experiences and response. Genotype, experience, how they respond. Genotype, experience, and how they respond. Genotype, experience, and how they respond. Right. So if you have to look at this whole argument, we have to focus on this particular part. So it is a predictable interaction based on experience and genotype. For it to be predictable, so experience and genotype. For similar experience and similar genotype, for it to be predictable, the response should be identical. Okay, that is actually necessary for this, right? So because it is predictable interaction of experience and genotype, for similar experience and similar genotype, for us to predict it, the response has to be identical. So which of the following, if true, actually leads absolute support to this is, ladies and gentlemen, option D. It says all organisms with identical genotype and identical experience respond identically in identical situation. If that is true, then it gives a lot of weight to this particular premise mentioned in this whole argument, right? The rest of them actually are wrong. For example, if I take option A, all with identical genotype, identical experience respond differently in different situations. This is not helping us in this particular argument, because we have to look at how can I say it is predictable by providing a situation where they respond differently. Look at B, all organisms with different genotype respond identically. Oh, that's a big problem. If the different genotype respond identically, how can I say that the response is based on genotype? This is actually refuting the claim that is being made. Let's look at C, for example. All organisms with similar genotype and similar experience respond differently in identical situation. Completely destroys the argument being presented here. They are not supposed to respond differently because it is predictable. They have to respond in the same fashion. And if you look at option E, all organisms with identical genotype with different experience respond identically. For different experience, if there are different experience, how can they respond identically? If that is true, then it is not predictable based on experience. The one that makes sense is option D. Slightly tricky, yet if you logically evaluate this particular option, you'll be able to answer the question. Let's look at XAT 2011, one that probably can break your head. So just pause the video, read it, and then answer the question, and let's see if you got it right or wrong. Now this says, which of the following, if true, would most strengthen the argument presented above? So again, our step is simple. We'll identify the standard form in terms of identifying what the premise and the conclusion is. Second is, if there are any assumptions, we'll try and identify the assumption, and then we'll evaluate the options. Okay, now let's read this whole argument. It says media are not just passive channels of information. Not only do they supply the stuff of thought, but they also shape the process of thought. And what the internet seems to be doing is chipping away our capacity for concentration. So media is not just passive. Why are they not just passive? Because they not only do they supply the thought, but they also shape the process of thought. Well, that's a key thing. And he has given an example of it. By internet seems to be chipping away our capacity for concentration. So the argument you can say is media shapes the process of thought. Media is not passive, and there is an example with respect to internet doing it in the negative way. So the whole argument, the key thing that we have to identify is media shapes the process of thought, and the conclusion is media is not passive. So in each of the answer choice, we have to check whether there is media. That is the first thing that you have to check. And the second they check, do they actually shape the process of thought? These are the two things that we need to check in each of the options. Okay, let's see option number 1. Nietzsche was forced to use a typewriter. Is that a media or a medium? Okay, channels of information. Okay, when he started losing his vision, after he mastered the tech machine, he could type with his eyes closed. It was later found that under the effect of the machine, Nietzsche's prose changed from arguments to aphorisms, from thoughts to puns, from rhetoric to telegram style. So therefore clearly there is a change in process of thought. And the question is, can I consider the effect of machine as some sort of media as explained in this particular passage? We'll keep it aside. Let's evaluate option B. Option B, one of the effects of the timekeeping instruments, very good. Is that a media or a medium? We don't know, but let's read. Has been that we have started deciding our daily activities based on clock. We are deciding our dating activity based on clock and not based on our senses. If it is not based on our senses, how can you say that it has shaped the process of thought? So B is incorrect. Let's go check C. Studies have shown that essay writing skills on an average from 15 to 20-year-old who spends a lot of time browsing the net is comparable to what is among the average 15 to 20-year-old throughout 1980s and 1990. So all that is saying, option C is saying the habits has not changed from the past to today. The habits are more or less the same. If the habits are more or less the same, how can we say that the media has shaped the process of thought? This actually does not support the argument which is given if the habits are same. C is also rejected. D, and recent study has shown the number of people who fall asleep while reading a printed book has increased. People who fall asleep has increased. Reading a printed book. Does that in any way suggest a process of thought? All that it means that people are, or does it actually support this one? Capacity to concentration? It's not clear. All that we need, but here it's about internet, specifically about internet. This is about reading a printed book. So neither is it supporting this particular case, where here this example being presented, because that example is specific to internet, right? And this is about book. Nor it is supporting this case that there is media shaping the process of thought. So D is also rejected. Let's go to E. The ability of the younger judges who have grown up with ready access to internet to judge complex intricate cases has on average become better as compared to judges in the early days. So internet helped them. So that kind of attacks what is given here. That internet seems to be doing is chipping away our capacity of concentration. Even E is rejected, which means when we have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, is a truth. So said Sherlock Holmes. We can come back and say, therefore, answer A is correct. Maybe you're talking about media in general, all medium of communication, and this could also be a part of that definition. So here we say a media shaping the process of thought. Therefore, answer choice is A. Let's take one more. Please pause the video, solve it, and see if we get the answer. Okay, here the question is asking, which of the following can best help to reduce the negative consequences among students in business school? So we have to reduce the negative consequences, and therefore we need to first understand what are those negative consequences mentioned in this particular passage. It says widespread use of lectures in classrooms in business schools lead to severe negative consequences. What are those? The first consequence is theoretically knowledgeable graduates who cannot apply theory to solve real world problems. The more serious consequence is that lectures encourage a feeling of total omniscience or omniscience, as they say in UK, I think, omniscience. Yeah. Anyway, the more serious consequence in that lecture encourage a feeling of total omniscience among them, which persists for quite some time before graduating. This feeling prevents them from learning from their subordinates and colleagues. So what are the two consequences? One consequence is the fact that people cannot apply theory. That is consequence number one. The second consequence is preventing them from learning from a subordinate. Okay, and we have to look at what changes can be done in the business school which can change the whole thing, help them apply theory, help reduce the negative consequences. If you read all these answer choices, ladies and gentlemen, it has to be D. Modify the pedagogy or the learning methodology to have knowledge of theory and application in parallel. If knowledge of theory and application in parallel, at least it will help address this particular case. It may not address the second one, but at least it does address the first one, because the question says it can best help to reduce these negative consequences. Let's look at other answer choices. Do they actually help? Use illustrations of real life. If problems in classroom, how does that help? Illustrations of real life is just about theory. Okay, just that you've taken it from real life. You're not helping them learn any practical application. Just because you use illustration in real life, how can they ensure that they apply theory? How does it address it? B. Send the students to find business problem. It is your job as a teacher, as a business school, to provide learning to the students. Here is an amazing solution that you actually send the kid to figure out the business problems themselves, so they can be discussed in the classroom. Okay, that is not actually helping them overcome any of this, because also in this case they cannot apply theory to solve real world problems. The question is applicability. They are not able to apply this theory. It is not that they don't know the world's real world problems. Here they will understand the real world problems. Even in this case, they'll understand the real world problems. But the question is, they cannot apply theory. There is a problem. There is a theory. The problem is they cannot apply it here. Just by knowing this problem does not really help. The bridge has to be that something that helps them apply the theory into this problem, which is why A and B doesn't make sense. Business education should be given to students who have work experience. Irrelevant. Are these people? I don't know that the students in the classroom have experience, or experience is a problem. Mentioned, not mentioned. Removing theoretical input from the curriculum altogether, only practical problems. This is an extreme case. Removing theoretical input is not saying the theory is bad. The whole argument is about applying theory is a problem. So which is why D makes sense. Modify the pedagogy to have knowledge of theory and application in parallel. Ladies and gentlemen, there is your answer choice, D. So in this session, what we looked at is we started with basics. We first understood what are arguments, Arguments are a series of statements where you have premises which are used to justify the conclusion. Then we understood what is known as standard form. Standard form is our ability to convert anything given in a paragraph into what the conclusion is and what the premise is. That's the second thing that we did. The third thing that we did is to understand assumption. Assumptions, ladies and gentlemen, is things that are necessary for the argument make any sense. So you have a premise, you have a conclusion. An assumption is something that is hidden, which is required for the argument to make sense. And the fourth is we looked at questions, which is to evaluate options. So evaluate arguments, sorry. Evaluate arguments. New data is given to us and we looked at how this new data affects the particular argument. This more or less is critical reasoning. My suggestion would be to go back and solve the questions from past XAT papers. Thank you.